Hello and welcome. You're watching Trending Tech on NewsX World, where we bring you the latest tech breakthroughs and trends from around the globe. European cybersecurity rules are tightening with the NIS2 directive and the Cyber Resilience Act, setting strict standards for data protection, network security and incident reporting. Unlike the US or parts of Asia, Europe mandates rapid reporting and cross-border accountability. For Indian companies working with European partners, compliance is critical. Non-compliance can bring fines, contract losses and reputational damage. Upcoming EU rules on AI and digital markets could disrupt supply chains and data flows. Questions remain on how companies will adapt, manage risks and align with these new EU cybersecurity rules. To discuss this and more, joining us now is Dr. Dennis-Kenji Kipker, a leading cybersecurity expert. He's the founder and scientific director of the Cyber Intelligence Institute in Frankfurt, a board member at Certivo AG, and a visiting professor at Riga Graduate School of Law. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Kipker. It's a pleasure to have you here on the program.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Let's get straight into this. Dr. Kipker, could you start by explaining the key cybersecurity regulations currently in place in Europe, such as the NIS2 directive or the Cyber Resilience Act, and how they achieve and how they've evolved in recent years?
Yeah, so it is quite clear that Europe's cybersecurity rulebook has shifted from best practice to enforceable cross-sector obligations. So GDPR, as aforementioned, is set a baseline for security and breach notification, while NIS2 directive broadens the scope well beyond the original NIS framework dating back to the year 2016, just addressing critical infrastructure cybersecurity. And this new NIS2 direction pushed also the member states to transpose it by October last year, pairing risk management duties with fast staged incident reporting. And in parallel, we see that product-based cybersecurity is more important than ever because we have the new Cyber Resilience Act, and that moved product security into the spotlight by imposing security by design requirements on products with all kinds of digital elements that are imported into the European Union.
And how do these European regulations differ from cybersecurity frameworks in other regions like the US or Asia, and what lessons can non-European companies learn from the EU's approach to data protection and incident reporting?
Yeah, so generally said, compared with the EU's more horizontal prescriptive approach that we see with the current regulation, so with clear legal duties, clear defined regulators and also relatively high fines, the United States, for example, remain more sector driven and framework heavy, so often anchored in special guidances. But we see that regulations there are tightening too. For example, in public companies that face SEC requirements to disclose material cyber incidents within 4 business days after the cyber incident is determined. And also authorities are building, in the US, building mandatory incident reporting for covered critical infrastructures. And across Asia, the cybersecurity regime varies widely. So we have highly regulated critical infrastructure models to more state-centric data controls. But the most transferable EU lesson, in my opinion, is operational. So treat incident reporting, evidence preservation and supply accountability as core business processes.
And for companies in India that operate globally or partner with European firms, why is compliance with EU cybersecurity standards crucial? And what specific risks do they face if they don't adapt?
Yeah. So for India-based companies operating globally or serving EU customers, these kind of EU compliance rules, they matter because European partners and companies will flow requirements down the digital supply chain That means security controls, audit rights, rapid notification in case of data breaches, cybersecurity incidents, and many obligations are very time crucial. When we go back to NIS2, for instance, experts, there's a stage reporting need. So there's an early warning within 24 hours and notification duty within 72 hours, and also the rule to issue a final report later on, which forces maturity in detection, triage, and communication of cybersecurity incidents. And if companies don't adapt, the risks are commercial, so that means lost contracts, failed vendor assessments, exclusion from regulated supply chains, and also possibly legal reasons for compliance. That means claims, penalties under civil law, public law, under applicable EU regimes. And there are also some operational risks. So, for example, being forced into expensive rush of compliance after an incident instead of building resilient capabilities up from the incident.
And in your view, how might upcoming changes in EU regulations, such as those related to AI and digital markets, impact supply chains and data flows between Europe and India?
Yeah, so generally speaking, EU rules on AI and digital markets are likely to add friction and clarity to EU-India data and product supply chain. So the EU AI Act, for example, is already in force with phased applicability, including earlier obligations for some areas and broader applicability by August this year. So EU customers will increasingly demand a model system documentation for AI governance, risk controls from Indian suppliers who build, fine-tune or integrate AI into products and services. And meanwhile, we see also in the EU that market and data rules are of high importance, and they are really pushing interoperability and portability of IT systems, also including cloud computing. For example, the Data Act has applied since September 2025, and the Digital Markets Act has applied since May 2023. So contracts and architectures in IT, disruptive technologies, will need to support data access, switching, transparency in ways that reshape cross-border data flows and vendor lock-in dynamics.
And Doctor, can you share real examples of how European cybersecurity breaches have affected international businesses and what preventative measures Indian companies should prioritize?
Yeah, so European incidents have repeatedly shown how a regional breach becomes a global business event. So NotPetya, as an example, disrupted Maersk company worldwide and was estimated to cost the firm roughly 200 up to 300 million US dollars. We had the WannaCry, a cyber incident that forced major NHS disruptions. That's the National Health Service of Great Britain, with an estimated total of over 19,000 cancelled appointments, medical appointments. So there is a high risk of critical infrastructures. And also Norsk Hydro's ransomware crisis that cascaded really across operations with reported losses around 70 million US dollars. So each of these is illustrating how downtime, logistics, and trust failures propagate across borders and partners. And more recently, supply chain breaches, exploitation affected a lot of organizations, so internationally as well, including the United Kingdom, reinforcing that third-party exposure can be as damaging as direct compromise for each company. And for Indian firms, the practical priorities are disciplined patch vulnerability management, strong identity controls, for example, and backup policies.
And Dr. Kipker, for years, cybersecurity has largely been treated as a technological or operational concern, managed by IT departments rather than boards or foreign ministries. Europe is now embedding cybersecurity into binding law, trade relations, and product regulation. Are we witnessing a shift where cybersecurity becomes a form of economic sovereignty and geopolitical power rather than simply a digital hygiene?
Yeah, so currently we are talking very strongly about EU digital resilience. So cybersecurity, of course, is an important concept, but only to take a look on cybersecurity can be a little bit outdated all these times where we talk about hybrid threats. So we are talking about a broader principle of integrating cybersecurity in a lot of other dangers. And this is what we are currently regulating in the European Union. And this is, of course, an important shift, because cybersecurity is not more just some technical organizational measures that are prescribed by operational IT departments or in abstract contract regulations. We see that cybersecurity and digital resilience more and more shifting to a political sphere where we have to make strategic decisions, not only in policy making, not only by governments in the European Union, but of course also by the companies, to see which vendor is being used, how secure the vendor is, how the digital supply chain is being secured, and what this also could mean to national regulation in the field of cybersecurity and digital resilience. So what we clearly see is a big shift from operational cybersecurity to cybersecurity policy, to the whole topic of digital resilience in uncertain global times.
And under Europe's new regime, a company may be held accountable not only for its own security failures, but also weakness in third-party software, open source components, or even overseas vendors. Does that push companies towards tighter, more closed supply chains, or could it reverse years of globalized modular software development?
So it is quite clear that these companies have to be more focused on the digital supply chain. This is quite clear. And this is also why we have regulations such as the EU Cyber Resilience Act, because in the past, many companies use third-party components, that means hardware, software, any kind of cloud computing services. All these services function, but it was quite unclear how cyber secure, how data privacy secure these services are. In the past, we have seen in the European Union that there had been a lot of successful cyber attacks all throughout the different sectors and IT branches, even addressing government and state authorities, due to the fact that the digital supply chain had been unsecure. And this is why the European Union is currently very tightly focusing on securing the whole digital supply chain. So that means, for example, that manufacturers coming from India, they have to ensure that all the different components that are technically speaking a part of their product have to be cyber secure. So it's not just addressing a company itself, so being cyber secure, that employees are aware of cybersecurity dangers. It's also about protecting this digital infrastructure. And one part of this, technically speaking, is the implementation of software bill of materials, that every company is aware of the software that is being used in a final product. And that also addresses proprietary software coming from other companies or program libraries, but of course also open source software, which has the same difficulties when it comes to cybersecurity.
And finally, how can policymakers, both in India and abroad, and also business leaders, align more strongly with European cybersecurity norms to foster economic ties and innovation between the two regions?
Yeah, so generally speaking, stronger EU-India alignment will come from making compliance in some way translatable across borders. So policymakers, they can harmonize definitions, reporting interfaces, invest in trusted information sharing and computer emergency capacity, and encourage also internationally recognized controls, so Indian firm can evidence this kind of cybersecurity readiness I mentioned in their vendor assessment. And on the business side, leaders should map the processes to EU expectations. So as I mentioned, rapid incident notification, supply chain controls, and product security engineering directly from the beginning. And last but not least, it would also be important for Indian companies to use bilateral channels to reduce cybersecurity ambiguity, for especially through the EU-India Trade and Technology Council, which proves a concrete platform to coordinate on digital governance and resilient value chains. And because India already mandates very fast incident reporting on cyber incidents within 6 hours for specified incidents, organizations that operationalize timely detection and reporting in cybersecurity incidents are well positioned to meet all these new EU cybersecurity requirements, to have technology exports into the European Union single market, and to meet also EU partner demands from companies coming from the EU.
Dr. Dennis-Kenji Kipker, thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of Trending Tech. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. And
with that, it is a wrap on this episode. For more tech updates and innovations, stay tuned here on NewsX World.